he's just, and I told him, I said, oh, he's an older guy. I said, when you get older, you get grumpier. And he's like, yeah, but man, he disrespected me. I said, you let him. I said, you chose to feel disrespected. He may not have meant it that way. I said, but even if he did, I said, so what? I said, just move on, you know? He's having a bad day. I said, don't let that ruin your day. You know, and he's like, yeah, you're right. And he went about his business. And I seen him later that night. So obviously he didn't do anything, you know, to get himself in trouble. But, you know, you see people struggle, you know, young people, older people, you know, people our age. And, you know, that's just life, you know. But taking advantage of those opportunities, like I said, at work, you know, is so important because, you know, if you really want to, you know, do something with your life, and maybe it's as simple as I just want to make more money for whatever reason, because money can buy things that, you know, maybe you can't afford in the moment, and instead of stealing it, you work for it, which is the right thing to do. And, you know, I've seen a lot of people not take advantage of opportunities because they either doubt themselves or they feel that it's not worth their time, you know, and whether they're lazy or, you know, they lack that motivation, you know, and it's like, well, at the end of the day, you know, you sleep in your bed, you make it, so you sleep in it. And if you want a messy one, that's by choice, you know. And if you want to be, you know, where you're stable, you know, maybe not necessarily comfortable, but stable, then, you know, that's what I try to tell people is, you know, make sure that you're okay with you. And if you're not feeling okay, that's okay. But, you know, reach out to people, you know, and if you don't have somebody to reach out to, one of the things I did when I was in prison is I would vent, and I did it through writing, you know, and it was important to do that because I had to get that energy out, you know. And once you work out, you can only work out, people, oh, just work it out. Yeah, sometimes you work it out, but then you still feel some type of way, you know. So I'd have to learn how to, you know, write it out, you know, talk it out, you know. So
there's you talk about opportunities. It's a good. Oh, before I forget, I also when it came to my bed, the prison mattress, I didn't put a sheet around the prison mattress. I slept on it because it was easier to clean every day. I could just clean it, and it was cooler to me, and that way I got 2 clean sheets instead of just the one that they gave me every week. So it was also, I had a soul science to why I didn't do it. And you talk about opportunities. So what opportunities while you were incarcerated do you feel you missed? And then you talked about this already. Which ones did you take advantage of?
So some of the ones that I missed so there were some that I missed because obviously I was in the hole, you know, when I first went into prison. Before I even got there, like, and I justified this because, you know, when you first get locked up, there's, you know, you're either an inmate or you're a convict. That was the 2 titles that, you know, you would hear thrown around. But I didn't feel, I felt like that wasn't me. And so because when they raided my house, I felt like I was taken captive. So I see myself as a captive. So that's how I justified my escape behavior. You know, I did not want to stay in prison willingly. So before I got there, I attempted to escape and ended up with a 30-year prison sentence just for the battery out of that, and then 10 years for the escape. And they sent me to Dodge from the county jail, and I attempted to escape from Dodge, and that got me sent to the hole. I went to Supermax, and obviously in the moment I didn't realize all the opportunities that I could have taken advantage of, whether it was schooling or programs or, you know, even the, you know, being able to network with your family members and your friends. You know, you just never know, and we will never know. But there was a lot of stuff that I was good at, you know, drawing, and I could have taken advantage of doing stuff like that. I had friends that did like leather tooling and, you know, beadwork and stuff like that, and also the jobs. Because of those choices, obviously security, you know, you got to escape, and battery history there, it limits you, you know. And it took me years before they were willing to trust me, you know. And once, I think my big opportunity was when I was in Green Bay. I got a job working maintenance. I was the welder there. I was a welder by trade, so it was kind of like a no-brainer. But I kind of doubted myself, like, I hadn't welded in like 13 years, and it's like, how am I going to get this job opportunity over everybody else? Like, there's, you know, over 1,000 guys here that maybe not all of them are going to put in for that job, but there's going to be somebody I'm competing with for this job. And I didn't know the supervisor, the civilian supervisor, but I knew a couple of the guys that worked there, and they were like, man, just, we'll put in a word for you, just, put in an application. So what I did, and this is something that I learned through the legal process, and, whether people want to take this as advice and use it, that's up to them, but it worked for me many times over. So I put together a resume, which most guys did not do for institution jobs, because they, pretty much, it's guaranteed.
Yeah.
Nothing's guaranteed, but I wanted to stand out, and so I put in the resume, and I had a cover letter and all that, but I put it in like the biggest envelope we could buy on Canteen. So it was like, the 11 by 15 or whatever it was. And I didn't know it at the time, but I found out after I got hired. My supervisor at the time, Russ, came and he interviewed me. He's like, if you want the job, it's yours. And then he told me months later, he's like, yeah, he's like, you know why I hired you, right? And I said, probably because I'm a welder and know what I'm doing. And he's like, no, he's like, I don't know, it was just something about this big envelope. Every day I come back, go on my break, go to eat, and there's this huge envelope, and I didn't want it on my desk, and it didn't fit in my filing cabinet. So eventually I opened it up, like, who sends this? Like, who is this guy? So he's like, I had to get to know who you were. And he's like, I'm glad that I hired you, you're a really good worker and all that, but I always had the belief that the bigger the envelope, the more space it takes up on like a judge's desk or a lawyer's desk or something. So they're gonna open it first to get rid of it. And it actually worked out in my favor plenty of times, and in that case right there. But it was those opportunities, and then unfortunately, Russ passed away, and I was able to run the weld shop until we could, I actually had to train somebody, and we hired somebody new as a civilian worker. But I took advantage of that opportunity to show security that, if I wanted to, I have access to the vehicles, I had access to the, ladders, torches, the tunnels, everything there. And instead of, trying to escape again, it was like, I'm gonna hire guys that want to learn, not necessarily knew how to weld to begin with, but they wanted to learn. I was able to teach guys how to weld. I was able to mentor them. Some of them had kids and stuff, and they were able to go on and move down to medium to minimum, got jobs as welders on work release and stuff, saved up money. And it's funny because I really wanted to weld when I was on work release, and I didn't end up doing that. I did something completely different, but I was offered a welding position where I work now 3 times and turned it down, only because back then it was, it's where the money's at. Welders get paid good. Well, I get paid better now, and I turned it down because I didn't want to take a $10 an hour pay cut, which is a good position to be in.
Yeah.
And it just shows that even while you're in prison, you think this is where your life is going to lead and you're going to end up doing this. Yeah, I did do it while I was in Green Bay, and then again when I was at Winnebago on work release. I worked maintenance there, and I was their welder. So you never know when you're going to use it. And I do weld where I'm at, but that's not my actual position. I'm a die repairman, so it's setting the dies, changing dies, working on hydraulic, leaks, air leaks, water leaks, that type of stuff, and fixing the machinery, sometimes running it. And then there's times, you got to weld out a bolt or whatever. But yeah, it was like, there was so many other opportunities that, and this was the importance of always having an updated tape score. We hear about the tape scores. So I got to Prairie du Chien, and I was actually going to weld there outside. I was going to be one of the first guys to go outside the fence and weld in the community once they got work release. And I was like, I'm not going to roll the dice. Like, I have an opportunity to go to Winnebago. I'll be working in the community. I can pay off my debts. I can save up money. I can get a driver's license. That was, to me, seemed more appropriate and realistic. And it turned out that was the better choice. But on the other side of that, I was scheduled to go to, I believe it was McNaughton, and they were offering heavy equipment operator certification. And I was one of the few people that had an up-to-date tape score. So I qualified, and they gave me a choice. And it was like I had all these things I wanted to do. I wanted to be a peer specialist certified. And so they're like, well, you have to give up your minimum custody and go backwards. I said, that's not going to happen. And then it's like, oh, I can go weld, but I didn't want. So it was like all these opportunities that I didn't have. Yeah. Now they're all being thrown at me at the same time. So I kind of like had to make a decision. And the same thing with the bachelor. With the schooling, I could have went to college, and I did some college education, but I could have furthered that. And it was like, do I really need that? Am I going to really use it? And it's like, no, I'm not, at least not right now. And I did have other things on the table. So it was like, I'm going to, give up those opportunities for other people. And I did that when I was in Red Granite. I actually did the baking vocational there, scored high enough. I was able to, they gave me a choice that I want to do the apprenticeship program. And I was like, that's not my goal. I just wanted to get a vocational under my belt so PRC could no longer use that against me. I got right in, completed it, and I gave that opportunity to one of my peers who actually wanted to do it. He was very grateful, and he went on to do, complete that. Where my goal was, and again, everybody's circumstances are different. And I was being told, you're going to be here a minimum of 5 years because of your sentence structure. And I said, I'm going back to court. I already have this planned out. And they were like, it's unrealistic. Your goals are unrealistic. You're not going to get your good time restored by the warden. Like, you can't force them. And it's like, I know I can't force them, but like, I can irritate them, and that's kind of like, you have irritational speakers, motivational speakers. I've studied both. So it's like, sometimes you got to irritate people. And I think I was just so persistent. But at the same time, I think at that time, like 50 some program completions. I had a clean conduct, record for several years.
Yeah.
I was doing all the right things. I felt, what can the warden say? Yes or no? Like, I tried before and they said no. As long as I was able to do it, I was going to keep asking. The deputy warden restored all 6 months, 15 days good time. I ended up getting 10 years knocked off my sentence. Thought that was going to be enough to move forward. It wasn't. I had to appeal my early recall. They said that couldn't be done. I ended up winning that. And then they sent me to a secure minimum, which was Prairie du Chien. That's when I got introduced to, we were just experiencing COVID. So I had to do the whole quarantine before I left and stuff. And so there was missed opportunities along the way, college opportunities and different programs and certifications. But again, it's all, you kind of have to know what you're willing to invest your time in. Are you willing to give up, certain statuses? Like, there's guys that go back to max from medium to go do, biblical studies at Waupun. And they're like, why would somebody do that? Well, because they value that more than they value, the perks of being in a minimum or a medium. So to each their own. And that's not always easy. Sometimes, you got to make that decision too, and we've heard this many times and we see it where family members are asking, what is the best max?
Yeah.
And it's like, I always tell people, the one you can get out of the quickest, the one you spend the least amount of time at. And the reason that is important is because if you spend less time in max, you can move down to, a minimum a lot sooner. Once you get out of max, you get to a medium, they're going to look, okay, well, how did you do in max? Well, you did great because you went right to a medium.
Right.
And not everybody gets that opportunity. So I don't know. For me, I feel like, I did miss out on opportunities, but I also took advantage of a lot of opportunities, whether it was helping pilot book clubs, taking advantage of, vocationals, like I did when I got to Prairie du Chien. I did the Microsoft Word one, as a college course. And that was the other thing. I always, when I would sign up for these things, it was, I know I'm going to be able to use this in the future if necessary. So it was like, I can fall back, but I always prepared. Like, I didn't want to waste time. Like you said, you thought the energy to make a bed was wasting time or energy. And I get that. So when I was in the hole, a lot of the times, I accepted responsibility for why I was there, but I showed accountability by taking, I'd have my own math books, or whatever I needed. And I was fortunate that I could study while I was in the hole. So that way, when I got out, I could hurry up, sign up for whatever college courses. And then people are like, damn, how did you do that course in like 2 weeks? It's like, well, I just tested out. I learned, what does the college allow? Can you test out? A lot of people, they didn't know you could even test out. And it's like, the teacher would just tell me, like, if you think you're prepared, and it's like, I am, and I was, and that was the difference right there. And I seen, I had friends that I was, trying to get them to understand, you need to stop focusing on, these other things. Like, one of them was so focused on, fantasy football, that we're in the math class together. And I'm like literally snapping on him, like, hey, let me focus on what I need to do, and we can talk about football and whatever else you want outside of here, because I didn't value that as much as what I needed to do in order to move forward. You know, and I kind of used a lot of that stuff. I looked for stepping stones.
Yeah.
That's what was important to me. I wanted to move forward.
For me, the things that I missed in my opportunities, I feel I missed. You never know if you miss something, if it was like, you know, the best course for you. But I wish I used to, when I got out, call myself 80 to 82% fluent in Spanish. Because I was pretty, I'm still pretty decent. You know, having been to other countries, I was able to talk my way through most any situation. But I don't know, I wouldn't call myself fluent by any means. And so I wish I had done enough to complete that fluency. It's something about knowing another language for different reasons, something I wish I had completed. And I also wonder about if I had taken a different degree. Like I said, there weren't many options. Criminology was one. I sometimes wish I had a greater understanding of certain elements of criminology, but they're also pretty easy to learn now. So it's just not as much of a lost opportunity as the language part. But those are the things I think of. Beyond that, I think I did a pretty decent job taking advantage of what was around me when I was inside. The things that I did were, I didn't have many programs, because when I got locked up, I had optional for pretty much everything. And then I thought I had vocational optional the whole time, but apparently I had it as a requirement. That came to be some interesting stuff later in my incarceration when they tried to force me into a horticulture program at Oak Hill. The individual who did that is now a politician, actually, in Wisconsin, which is interesting. And my numbing story of this person at an event trying to talk to me about how other people were giving me a hard time. I'm like, you were the one. So it just changed the entire story in that person's mind, apparently, of what actually happened. And when I was in, my journey was one of reading a lot, writing a lot, and just a lot of introspection, really evaluating like who I am, why did I end up in this place, how do I change the trajectory of my life, how do I ironclad create a new version of myself that's going to be able to handle anything. Newsflash, that has not been created, because like it's not possible, because it's just so many new things come up where you think you're situated. And essentially, one of the things that I think is really telling for my journey is that it was reading, writing, starting to submit things as a writer to publications, getting denied left and right, thinking I was, you know, a writer, realizing this is really complicated, finally starting to get some stuff published, starting my degree, starting this coping skills program at Stanley that now exists in a variety of different facilities, in a different form, not the one that we created it, starting a blog, starting the newsletter, which was the community, and graduating, and then kind of working my last final years to come home. And when I was at Thompson, the correctional center, I finally got a job. I was there for a little while and got a job at Opportunities Cat Food. And I worked for 5 weeks and I quit. And people are like, oh my God, how would you quit a work release job? Because for so many folks, all the benefits of being on a work release job, besides just the money, were like, oh my God, like who would give that up? And for me, I felt like that job was not going to benefit me as much as me investing in myself the rest of my time. It just, after 5 weeks, I was like, no, I'm not going to keep spending 10 hours standing on my feet, putting cat food in a box, being treated like I'm I'm basically an incarcerated person at the job. But if you look at the work release rules, like you can't actually exist as a regular worker. You are genuinely, you're incarcerated, but you're just there. You're following all the rules. You can't participate in anything or even be normal conversation. And all of it just was like, this is not helpful for me. Like I can do more on my own, just going back to continuing to reading, write, and ideating and planning. And I kind of feel like it worked out for me, but it was just one of those ways where, I don't know if you know who Gordy Hoff was. You ever meet Gordy? So Gordy, I remember one time I ended up doing, I was at 2 facilities with Gordy. And the second facility I was at, I was telling him about like, because the farm at Oak Hill, it was the first time I did it. They offered me the job at the farm. I said, nope, I'm good. I don't want to go out there at 3 a.m. and go milk cows and come like for an extra 60 cents. It just didn't make any sense to me. I was like, I can go to work release just fine in like a year or whatever it was, less. And Gordy said, you always do things your way. And I think that's for me. I said, if I ever write a book, it would probably be titled, I Did It My Way. Because I've always found a path that made sense to me. It maybe bucked the trend, but it was like, I was able to evaluate the landscape and determine that path is well worn, but it's not necessary, it's not the only way, and it doesn't make sense for me. And like, how do I find and have the comfort and confidence to pave my own path or take a path that's less well tread? And so that was like, I guess, my journey inside of the things that I did that I took advantage of. the library, took advantage of that. Super took advantage of that. That was huge whenever I had that at a library where I was located. Took advantage of really just getting to know folks, like genuinely the same way I am now. I was inside. I had educational friends, I had sports friends, I had folks that were just from the city that I would talk to. I had friends that played cards, so I just had different groups that I would engage with. And being racially ambiguous, I'm mixed, but I look like whatever you want me to look like. That also helps a lot in those scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
I look like I'm Hispanic and I speak Spanish, but I'm not Hispanic. So that was always a messed up people's minds. And yeah, just that environment of treating it like an exploratory school experience, a lot of times helped me come home. I feel much better prepared for all the chaos that happens in society. So those are just the moments I think of when I took advantage of what I maybe missed.
I think, and I think that's something that, especially for me, is once I got, I kind of outgrew my criminality. It got to a point where I didn't care to even engage in those conversations anymore. So it was I don't care to talk about, robbing armored trucks and shootouts and high-speed chases. Yeah, and it's it's okay, now you mature into an adult and you have responsibilities, you have these different values and these goals, and everything is different, but at the same time, you're still incarcerated. So that hasn't really changed for me yet. When I was in, I started to use my time in basically the prison itself. That was my university.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I always say, instead of choosing Princeton, I chose prison, but I probably got a better education. And for some who know me, they're probably yeah, you probably did, because I did learn the law, and that did help. I was able to obviously get myself out early, and I was able to help other people, and I still do use that to help people out. But like you, I read a lot of books. I've read thousands of books, and it wasn't just reading the books, it was learning how to apply the information that was in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd always correct, people would be, knowledge is power, and it's no, it's not. It's information. The application thereof, that is what can empower you. But still, understanding that I had a choice in how either I served the time or the time was going to serve me.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where it was I really didn't regret what I did,
mm-hmm.
Because it's there was really no point. That obviously, if I could go back in time and change things, yes, I would, but that doesn't mean things would have turned out better.
Yeah.
But I still, I want to see what would have been different about, my life. But I'm glad that, I reached a maturity level where it was okay, I see my situation as a positive thing now, because I accepted the fact that had I not been raided when I got raided, I wasn't going to go join the sainthood the next morning. I had automatic weapons, the people that I was hanging out with, we had plans, and we were going to execute those plans, and somebody would have either gotten killed or we would have got killed. It wasn't going to end well. It already was going bad. There was, some people had, know the whole story. They're oh yeah, you guys got lucky, and really we did. And, I was what do I do with the time that I have? And I realized I had an out date. It was far out. I had basically ended up with 30 years in and, 25 out, and I could work with that. I was okay with that. Even if I had to do all that time, I was still okay with it. And so I just started really reading as much as I could and learning how to apply it, and learning how to build a network, and then using that network. I had a network to begin with, but I didn't understand how to use it. Right. It was kind of like having, a Rolodex with all these, contacts, and it's I got a water leak and I'm calling, the electrician. Well, the electrician's not going to fix that. So I had to learn who I had in my inner circle that was going to be able to help me out. And there's a lot of times where, we have people in our circles that they want to be helpful, but because of life, things just don't work out. So I had to be mindful of that, learn to do things on my own. I had the benefits of, literally being in contact with some of the best attorneys in the state.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I would write to them and ask them for advice and stuff, but I just didn't trust them as much as I trusted myself.
Yeah.
And I was okay, I'm just gonna do what I gotta do. And I think reading so much And just like you know, you start writing, you think, oh, I'm a really good writer,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get denied or whatever, and it's like, well, okay, maybe not. But then I started, you know, doing better. I got better
Mm-hmm.
at it, and then I'd win like, you know, poetry contests or, you know, speaking contests, stuff like that, and it was good experience to have, but it was just a lot of the times in the moment you're not realizing why you're doing it, and it's like, am I just doing this to pass time,
Mm-hmm.
or you know, am I really going to be passionate about this and do something with it down the road? And you just really never know. You know, I have friends now that, you know, we were in different, you know, we do poetry jams and stuff like that, and I see them now and the things they're doing, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, but they said they were going to do that. You know, and that's the difference. You have a lot of people that talk about doing something, and it's like, but are you going to follow through?
Right.
You know, and like what you did with your newsletter, you know, you followed through, you took it to a whole nother level. It's still something that is evolving. You
Mm-hmm.
never know. Like this platform here, you know, where it goes, we don't know.
Right.
But we had to start somewhere. You know, it's not the perfect scenario, but it is, because all the choices that we made in the past brought us to this moment.
Right.
You know, you could have easily have said, I got too much going on. Or, you know, but we're
both
always
do.
like that.
Yeah,
We're
we
always,
both do,
we
but,
text
like,
each
you
other
gotta make it
3 in
work.
the morning, 1 in the afternoon. It's like we don't sleep. Like, yeah, we do, but we kind of don't, you know, and it's like, so, and I've had to turn people down. You know, I've had people ask for help, whether it's with their case, with commutations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I took on a lot. You know, I try to put together resource guides, and we did the video, stuff like that. So I try to manage my time. I try to, you know, be there for as many people as I can, but sometimes you have to say no.
Yep.
And you have to be okay with that and not feel bad about it, because you just can't help everybody. You know, so hopefully having a platform like this will kind of, you know, provide more access to not just us, but to other people that do this work. You know, and that's the thing is, you know, there are a lot of other people that are trying to help out.
Mm-hmm.
And I meet people all the time, you know, that I didn't even know that they were doing this stuff. You know, they're not out there like that.
Right.
Some people don't want to be out there like that. You know, they like to be low key, and that's okay.
Yeah. I talk about one element around, and we have just one question left before we kind of go into the final information about next episodes. But there was something you were talking about regarding, saying no, and it makes me think of, you know, I had to get comfortable with this. I know a lot of folks, when they get into the work for the first time, it's really difficult for them to not answer a phone call if somebody calls, or to not be able to help with whatever request the person has inside. And the reality is that for people inside, and I had the same thing when I was inside, I used to call, and you know, an hour is all the time in the world when you're inside. But out here, like a month is like so short. And what happens is people inside, they'll ask, and again, I'm saying this as somebody who was there, I get it, this isn't me criticizing, it's just like, there's a different dimension once you come home to understand time. And so when you're inside, you think you call back the next day and like, oh, why didn't they do that Sunday? Like, why is this thing still not done? You get so upset. The amount of times I see people inside who were really entitled, acting like their people, their wife, their girlfriend, their son, whoever was calling that they were talking to should have done the thing. They just cuss them out. I'm like you lucky they helping and answering your calls at all. That's a different conversation. That's a whole personality thing. But the whole idea of the dimension of time is something that I also wish I had a better sense of when I was inside, and I definitely wish people inside had a better sense of now, because like somebody can genuinely be trying to help you, but they just can't get to it for like a week or two. Like this is genuinely the case. Like it's so many things going on, and you factor in, you might think, and I get this a lot with people where they feel like, man, you ain't got like just an hour to meet with me. I'm like, it's not just you that I have to factor in. Like there are so many other things and people that are also wanting that 1 hour. In addition, when do I get some sense of like enjoying or experiencing life? Like all of that has to be balanced. And so that's just the comments here, I think, for people inside, because like having had it and knowing now the other side, it ain't just a matter of people don't want to help you when they can't or when they haven't done it yet. Like stuff really just happens and it just gets in the way.
Well, and I think that we had to be mindful of the fact, unless you're factually innocent and you didn't actually do the crime, you forfeited your freedom. That's just, you know, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. So I've heard this numerous times, man, my girl, she abandoned me, you know, my family, they abandoned me. It's like, well, you forfeited your freedom, you made choices, you actually abandoned them, you know, and as tough as that might be to hear, it's the truth, you know, and so
it changes your mentality.
Yeah,
how you do
and
your time
you can't
also.
just be upset because now all of a sudden they gotta, you know, take extra time out of their day, extra money that maybe they don't have to go visit you or provide whatever you need, you know. And it's like, I don't keep track of any, like, people don't owe me anything, you know, but I know I've spent tens of thousands of dollars on stuff that most people would be like, why? That's ridiculous. And it's like, I don't question it, because whenever I ask for help, nobody ever, oh, I can't do this or I can't do that. I was fortunate, you know, when I did actually need help, you know, they were there for me. My family and my friends were there for me. And not everybody has that, but again, you know, we put ourselves in situations that impact more than just us. And it's not always easy. And like you said, things come up, especially I don't have kids, but I have dogs.
Yeah.
And it's crazy how much, you know, they need time.
Right.
You know, when I leave here, I'm going to drive home back to Sheboygan, and I'm going to take them down to the beach so they can go swimming, because, you know, it's hot out and they enjoy that.
Yeah.
You know, so I can only imagine, you know, somebody that's got 3, 4, 5 kids, like, that's a lot. And then they got to work a job, and it's,
So a question that I have here is one that we didn't discuss. I just thought about it, so I can answer it first. I kind of give you some time to think about it, because I've had it before come to me from people, and you probably have as well. It's kind of for loved ones, but I think it's good for folks inside to hear this, because folks will ask me, how can they support their incarcerated loved one, right? Their person just got locked up, or their person's been down for 10 years, and they're trying to find out what can they do to truly be helpful. And I tell them it's this dance between, you don't want to enable and you want to support. And you got to find that line, and that's different for every person. You have to know the individual. What is actually enabling and what is actually supportive is custom. But I can tell you for a fact that people inside will tell you a story of things being so much unendurable and worse than they often are. And it's a tricky commentary to make, because like somebody will hear that and be like, oh, are you trying to say it's good in prison? No, I'm not. But as somebody who, from my vantage point, and I've seen numerous people experience time in prison where they had very little and they were at peace, they were okay, they weren't struggling. And then I've seen people who have a lot of money coming in and they get visits regularly and everything was a tragedy. And oh my God, I can't get these new shoes. And so it's a balance between really understanding that what is genuinely going to help your loved one. Is it going to be a new pair of shoes every 6 months? Probably not. Why are they running out of shoes so much? Why do they need 2 pairs? Back in the day, I don't know if you can still have 2 pairs. I don't think rules changed. Why do they need $50 in canteen every 2 weeks? Like, there's a certain level of what you actually need versus what people are just trying to get because it makes their time more comfortable, or it makes them maybe feel better because now they have more. There's a game of haves and have-nots inside too. People want to be dressed better. People want to have a cleaner pair of state shoes. People want to have more canteen in their box. Like, all the same crap that happens in the streets, people do inside. And if they're using your money for that, that's not helping them. So there's a really strong argument to be made for most people. And I don't know, I'd like to know maybe at some point create an algorithm for what it is to find your balance point with somebody. But folks don't need as much money as they think they do, and as much as they ask you for. Folks don't need as much clothing as they think they do and they ask you for. People need books. They need to be challenged. They need to be engaged with conversation, and they need to be going through programs that are available to them. Those are the things that folks should be getting challenged to do. And if you're providing something for them, it should be, how does this help you as a person, not how does it make you do your time easier? Because maybe you doing your time a little harder is the best thing for you. Maybe not having all these creature comforts is actually going to be better for you. I would say it almost always is. Everyone's situation is different. Again, I don't want to say mine was the same, but by and large, what I have seen is people exaggerating what they're really going through inside, and it's hurting them, and it's costing their loved ones, and it's making that relationship tense. And that would be a general commentary, I would say, loved ones and the people inside, to do better for your own people, right? You want your people to help you out. Do better for them by what can you provide so you don't need them to give you so much, right? What can you do more autonomously? Because like Randy said, at the end of the day, most folks inside are there because they did something to go inside. Yes, the system is what it is. The system is oppressive. It's got an entirely racist history. That's great. But at the end of the day, we all knew what we were doing when we did it, and we got ourselves inside. And taking that accountability and that mental stance changes the entire way you do your time, and it changes who you are when you come home to be much better prepared. So it's the way I look at that when loved ones ask me that question. I'm curious, you got anything that comes up for you on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember, numerous times, throughout the years where guys would come to me, and it's end of the world, and the sky is falling, and it's you kind of learn to get to know the people around you, and you have some people that, you know, certain situations I understand. You know, I remember a guy, he lost his wife, and it was very tragic, and he did not know how to respond, and he knew me, and he's like, is there any way that you can convince the staff, like, I need to get outside right now. Like, I cannot be in my cell. I can't be around people. He's like, I have to go outside.
Like outside the prison?
Outside the
unit,
our housing unit.
Okay, got you.
And we were in Prairie du Chien, and I said, you know what? I said, let me go talk to the sergeant. And talked to the sergeant. He called the white shirt, and the white shirt said, I'd rather him be out in the rec yard running laps, doing whatever out there than, you know, committing suicide or harming somebody else, or, you know, doing something to staff. So he's like, yeah, how long do you think it's going to be? And I said, I don't know. He's like, well, he's like, I don't want to rush anything. He's like, but, you know, if it gets late, he's like, just be mindful. Like, you guys got to be back by, you know, 10 o'clock. You know, and it was summertime, so it stayed light out pretty late. But yeah, it started getting dark out, and nobody came. We were the only two out there, and we had ran quite a bit, several miles, and we started walking, and he opened up, and he felt a lot better. And, you know, that to me was one of those crisis situations, you know, where staff, I feel, made the right choice. I had no problem, you know, giving him my time and being there for him when he needed somebody to be there. But then you have the other ones where it's like, yeah, you know, I didn't get my canteen order, and, you know, they want to file a lawsuit, and, you know, it's just ridiculous. And it's like, things happen, you know, you're gonna survive, they're gonna give you your meals. Yeah, the meals aren't the greatest. You know, like I said, I spent years in the hole. I didn't ask for sympathy. You know, I chose to do something that landed me there, and, you know, some days were better than others, but it wasn't like that bad where, like, yeah, my worst moment, you know, like I said, losing my mom, like, that was my rock bottom. But, you know, families as well, they need to, you know, understand where is that, you know, that line, you know, because people do often enable their loved ones, not realizing it, or in many cases, I get calls from mothers and girlfriends and wives all the time, trying to help out, you know, somebody that they really do love and they want the best for, and they will admit, you know, he's taking advantage of me, and you know I'm just enabling, you know, but he said he's going to go to the hole, and it's like, okay, that's his choice. Like, you know, if you're going to cave every time he threatens to go to the hole, I mean, I see that same game played, you know, with staff, and it's like, they can't cave every time. You know, you have to learn, you know, to do what you need to do to get through that moment, and trying to manipulate people, that's not going to get you far in life. It may get you what you want in that moment, but you're going to end up burning bridges, you know, and you don't want that. You know, it harms your loved ones, it harms yourself, you know. And like you said, if somebody, and I've done this, you know, guys will ask me, hey, can you send me some books, or can you send me, you know, whatever legal stuff they need. And it's like, I understand that they need that, and they don't always have access to it the way that, you know, we have access out here, you know. But at the same time, you know, I've had requests, hey, I need, you know, this and that for, you know, Pluto TV, and oh, this, you know, came up, and yeah, I need new shoes. And it's like, come on now, like, let's be realistic. Like, I have probably 20 some people on my GTL account. You know, when I took on commutations, you know, I filed for guys, and I can tell you on average it's about $100 if you make all the copies and you file everything certified and you get everything that you need. You know, so it adds up, you know. So people have to be mindful that you're not the only one. You know, and I get it, not everybody has somebody out there, you know, but if you do, don't you know, manipulate them, don't burn those bridges, you know, because you're gonna end up in a situation where you really do need the help, and maybe they're gonna tell you no, for real, and you're gonna be throwing a temper tantrum, and, you know, you don't want to, especially you don't want to be doing that, you know, when you're in a minimum, you know, about to get out, you know, because people want to know that if they're gonna let you come live with them or help you out, that they can trust you and that they can be safe. You know, and I've seen that, you know, where guys will threaten their girlfriend or whoever, and it's like, come on now. Are they really gonna harm them? Maybe not. but they don't know that.
Right.
You know, and you want to, and we'll talk about that. You know, we'll have, you know, episodes where we discuss healthy relationships and stuff. You know, and we have to learn that even out here after we get out. You know, everybody needs to set boundaries. Boundaries are a good thing. You know, and the other part of that is respecting other people's boundaries.
So you segue good about future episodes. So just some of the guests and the topics we have listed to address in the future: employers, crime survivors, correctional staff, entrepreneurs, college, university representatives, mental health, healthcare professionals, faith leaders, other formerly incarcerated people, for sure, a lot of that, families, loved ones, really just anything's possible. So if there's anybody that folks let us know think would be really valuable to have on, definitely we can make that happen. And the topics, like, again, same thing, any topic is possible. And like we have down now is more topics about reentry. That'll probably be infused, I imagine, with most of the topics that we talk about. There'll be some element of it. Relationships, as we said, money, finance, education, fatherhood, parenting, motherhood, healing, accountability, success stories, trauma, starting your own organization, writing, you know, just all these different things we're going to try and address. So we got a list. We'll add to it as we get more topics and ideas. There's no necessarily season 1 or 2 of this. You know, we'll just keep doing these episodes as they seem to be valuable. If they ever stop being valuable, if we ever feel like we get to a point where we've covered, you know, all the topics, the people will talk, and so, you know, we can cease from that. And basically, yeah, just kind of in closing, kind of talked already. Hopefully, you get a gist of what the show's about at this point. No reason to kind of go into that again, but definitely just keep in mind, you know, what do you want to know about the other side of the fence? It's the gist of the, no pun intended for Randy's column, but that's the gist of what we're trying to get to here and create a conversation from the outside in and from the inside out at the same time. So until next time, this is the Outside In. Thank you for listening. Hope it was valuable. Connect with us, and see you again soon. Peace.